Well, if it's Thursday, it's time for our panel of party commentators. Greg MacEachern is a Liberal commentator, Etienne Rainville is a Conservative commentator, and Robin MacLachlan is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I think it's kind of neat that climate change and what we can or should be doing about it has been before Canadians, and I think in one of the most significant ways in recent memory, at least in their national legislature. So I want to start our conversation there in this context. Andrew Scheer's big speech on the economy today focused on energy, attacked the Prime Minister for his, what he called an all-out attack on oil. And Greg, what he's proposing is a energy independence by 2030. He wants to be a big backer of energy projects, and he wants to create this national corridor, coast to coast, where all energy projects would go, so you wouldn't have to have these constant fights over where to locate a pipeline or a big energy project. What do you think?
Well, I mean, in terms of the big picture, we still don't have his climate change plan, and I think we're at the point, you kind of referred to it, that it's at a level of discussion now where for politicians, it's not a question of being, in terms of dealing with climate change, it's not a question of being on the right side of history, it's being on the right side of current events. We look at flooding here in Ottawa, we've had wildfires already start in British Columbia. The proposal around an energy pipeline, the first thing I thought of is, okay, good luck in Quebec. Last week we saw some signs from the Quebec Premier that he wasn't really on board with a lot of some of...
He also made it clear today he's prepared to exert provincial control over provincial jurisdiction when needed. So it sounds like if he thinks of pipelines in the national interest through Quebec, it's going through Quebec.
So politically, if I'm the Liberals, I'm going to be playing that up hard in Quebec, because for the Liberals and the Conservatives, they need Quebec, and the path to re-election is through that. In terms of the other aspects of energy independence, I do wonder, as somebody from the East Coast, where we still have electricity provided by coal, and sometimes that coal is not Canadian coal because the coal that's locally available is too dirty. Right. So I do kind of wonder how much it's been thought through.
What's he trying to do here, Etienne, with this? It's pretty clear that he wants to be the energy champion when he thinks Justin Trudeau and the others are not. He's putting his eggs in that basket. He says he's going to lead a government that says yes, not no. What does he want to communicate to people here?
Listen, I think coming from Alberta, this will resonate very strongly with Western Canadians who've been fighting against this government on bills like C-69 and most recently the tanker moratorium that we've seen the Senate vote down in committee most recently. Mm-hmm. I think Scheer's idea that he put forward in this speech, the second of 5 speeches, is really interesting and it's innovative. I think big ideas are what we need. I think big ideas are particularly needed on the energy file. I mean, we've had national gridlock for almost 4 years on this file. I think it's time to start looking at other options and different solutions and thinking creatively, and that's exactly what he's done here.
Longer than 4 years, let's be fair.
Robin, is this a big idea or a bad idea?
I would agree with Etienne that we do need big ideas, and I think Andrew Scheer needs a big idea so he doesn't just look like a revert back to the past with Stephen Harper, because that's what I heard a bit too much of that in this speech. It just looks like we're going back to betting everything on the oil and gas sector. I think this energy corridor that he suggested for pipelines and transmission probably sounded like a great idea on a whiteboard in the OLO. I'm not sure that it actually makes practical sense. An energy corridor. Well, so let's think about the battle over Energy East. I mean, Greg and I are from the East Coast. People of all political stripes on the East Coast are on either side of this issue. There were times when I thought Energy East could be a viable project. It was proved so hard through all the existing pipelines, Line 9 in Ontario and through Quebec, to actually look at trying to interconnect those into an east-west. So an energy corridor would presumably want to follow the existing energy infrastructure, and trying to piece those together has already proved too hard under both a Conservative and a Liberal government, so I'm not sure how an energy corridor would be successful. I would just quickly touch on the idea of being energy independent. I don't think there's anything wrong with this idea. I don't think it should be your #1 goal, but if you want to be truly energy independent, we have to look at how we're going to tap into our biggest energy resources, which is renewable energy. And that's proven both to now have more jobs in Canada than in the oil and gas sector.
That brings us to what we've seen in the House of Commons the last couple of days, dueling motions declaring a climate emergency in this country from the NDP and the Liberals, and the Tories suggesting some amendments to it, to the Liberal motion at least. But Greg, I guess I want to ask you 2 things. I mean, when Canadians watch this, at some point I think there's likely to be a tipping point of a sort of call to action. I mean, they're hearing all the options being proposed, what works, what doesn't work, what I'm for, what I'm against, and what they don't hear is anybody talking about how can we build consensus around something that needs to be done. Why is that so difficult?
Well, I think the political explanation is you have a lot of parties on the center left right now, and one party really on the right. So we've seen from recent by-election wins and the provincial election in PEI that the Greens potentially could have a bigger play than normally in the next election.
Their plan today is proposing the most drastic cuts of any of the parties that I've seen. So.
Absolutely, and not to be cynical, but it wouldn't be unheard of for the Liberal Party to take New Democrat ideas and package them and use them as part of their platform. What's interesting about this climate change, declaring a climate change emergency, which now the Liberals seem to like. It's one of those things where I think if you are cynical, you're going to ask, what does that mean? Yeah. And for your viewers, they might not realize that here in Ottawa, we had a couple of city councillors who are members of the New Democratic Party push this at City Council in Ottawa, and it got passed. We know that Andrea Horwath did this at Queen's Park as well. And so now we see the federal NDP doing it. So if it's an attempt to kind of knit together the base around this issue, that's great. But what does it actually accomplish?
Well, the NDP's done it, but the Liberal motion that calls for a climate, for the House to recognize we're in a climate emergency.
Yeah, exactly. So again, what does it actually accomplish?
So, I mean, where we are in the debate, because I think Canadians watching are saying, okay, look, we've seen polls earlier this week from Abacus Data saying, look, there's a consensus of Canadians. They're prepared to entertain carbon pricing as a basket, as part of a basket of all kinds of other changes. And I think we're at the point where Canadians want to say, okay, get together, you people, and figure out a plan for the nation. Not if we have an election in October, the idea of pushing forward a carbon tax and other things is off the table, and then we're looking at a whole bunch of different plans. So, what do Canadians? What are they expected to think about all this?
I mean, I think Greg was absolutely right in some of the points he made there about these both dueling motions coming at the same time, being about political posturing more than anything. I think it's likely in response to the losses that they both encountered in Nanaimo Ladysmith as recently as a week ago. I think they're certainly trying to shore up their left flank. For the Conservatives, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer till maybe until the end of session, a few more weeks perhaps, until we see a very comprehensive climate change strategy unleashed, or so I'm told.
And is it going to reveal to Canadians that Conservatives also believe there's a climate emergency, or leave aside, is that just a buzzword? But
I wouldn't be too hung up on
is it going to call for urgent action?
On that phrasing, I think it'll be really interesting to see what they've come up with, as it should be a very comprehensive solution to try and start addressing some of these ways in more creatively, like we saw with the energy corridor, that we haven't seen with the Liberal government, who's decided to sort of harp time and time again on carbon pricing, much to the dismay of a lot of the Canadian population.
Robin, why is it so hard to find consensus on this?
Well, I think Canadians from all political stripes and Canadian politicians from all political stripes have called this emergency when it's happening on the ground in practical instances. Greg alluded to this. We have 4 provinces right now dealing with practical emergencies that are related to climate change. So you may not make that connection, but a Conservative politician is going to say, we have an emergency here in Constance Bay in Ontario where there's flooding going on for all of my constituents. You may not connect that climate change,
but we have to start connecting.
We have to start connecting.
Why is it happening?
Whatever political stripe or however they vote, that person bailing out their house for 3 weeks straight on 2 hours sleep knows it's an emergency. So from a policy standpoint, looking at these motions, was there politics involved in politics around these motions? Absolutely. We're in an election year. But there's another thing that should be said, that whether it's Liberals or the NDP, and I'll speak specifically to the NDP, Jagmeet Singh said after the loss there that I've heard a message loud and clear. He also said it's a message directed to the government on policy decisions, but for him to come forward with a motion and, as some have pointed to, evolving his policy position perhaps on liquefied natural gas, you know what? We can all chuckle about that.
Brackets around the press.
Yeah, but I like to see a politician that's going to look at facts on the ground, listen to the voters who may not have voted for you, and then look to what they can do to be more in tune with what the Democratic electorate is saying they want to see. So the difference between those two motions, though, just very quickly, Liberals say it's an emergency and bring about no policy changes to address that emergency. The NDP talks about 8 different points in there that we need to do to recognize this is an emergency and do something about it. So we talk about action. Well, we can't be buying a $4.5 billion piece of oil infrastructure if we think that this is contributing to the emergency.
Is it possible to create a nonpartisan, common national plan to deal with climate change?
I don't think in this parliament it's possible. No.
Is it possible in any parliament?
Yeah, one that has proportional representation.
Well, maybe.
It's funny you mentioned that because that's actually sort of one of the points in the Green Party platform that they released was something akin to the war cabinet, where they would bring in ministers or quasi-ministers from other parties. But I think it's reasonably naive in terms of where our political situation is at these days.
All right. Thank you all. We'll talk again.
Thanks.